exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for tuning in to the Interactive Indies podcast. I am your host, Daniel Voth. If this is your first time listening, you can catch this podcast on YouTube in glorious, maybe not high definition video, but some sort of definition. And as well on our website, interactiveindie.com. There will be links to pretty much every major podcasting platform. And other than that, if you're unfamiliar with the kind of concept, the intent behind it is to kind of talk to creative people in the game development, interactive, and creative communities in Winnipeg, and kind of have a conversation and then share it on the podcast so we can kind of all share our stories and kind of relate to one another and kind of grow our kind of local community into a family, as I was saying earlier. And today is no different. I have a special guest, Z Yi. And maybe we'll just jump right into it. What would give people a good idea of like who you are, and then we can kind of jump into the details.
Oh man, it's difficult to kind of sum up myself in any sort of way. I would say I like making weird things. Mm-hmm. I like making new things. I just like making what I'm passionate about. You know, sometimes an idea comes to me and I want to make it.
So it's not even like specifically games, it's just you like the creative aspect, it's just games is maybe, or
I am passionate about video games, but it's not limited to video games. Okay. I happen to be in the games industry right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one thing I think is super interesting that we typically don't get a chance to get into when we're kind of like talking to people, whether it's at the Yellow Dog, which you had come to the last meetup, is kind of like where you come from or where we come from and our journey that led to where we are now. So I'm kind of curious to go back and what was the like growing up, were you always into that creative mindset that you were referring to?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe not in exactly the same way. So I wasn't always an engineer. I'm an engineer now. I do Unity development. I do mostly programming work. But growing up, I was more into art and music and just the non-technical side of everything, really. When I first became interested in game development, I was basically into everything except the technical aspect of it, which is kind of strange.
It's interesting how that kind of shifts over time.
Yeah, I just I played Ocarina of Time, and that sort of
as we all
and that sort of I was like, I want to make a game just like that.
Oh, cool.
And so I got into writing stories. And
how old were you during this time?
Like around 12.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and I started playing music and writing music in that style. Drawing things, learning how to 3D model, and I would just do everything. And the programming aspect of it sort of just like, I was like, someone else would take care of that. Like, that'll just happen.
Oh,
it's fine. And I just sort of ignored that aspect completely until I hit a block where I couldn't do anything more. So I had to force myself to learn programming, and I gave up like right away because it just did not. I did not jibe with programming at all. Mm-hmm. And then I tried again a year later, and then that's when it clicked.
So it's interesting that at such a young age, or maybe it's relative, of course, but at 12 you already had sounds like a pretty concrete idea of what you wanted to do.
Actually, it wasn't. I guess you could say that it was one of the things that I would have loved to do. I was at an age. I shouldn't say at an age because not everyone thinks like that at that age, but I definitely had I thought there were like a million things I wanted to do, and I could do all of it. So game development was one of those things. And specifically, I wanted to make a game like Zelda.
Like, right.
Yeah.
So where do those kind of influences come from? Because I would imagine, or maybe it is, like, as you mentioned a few times already, is Zelda, but were there any other kind of components that kind of contributed to you wanting to pursue that?
I would say that very early on, my parents, put me into like art programs and music programs. So like, I had to learn piano and stuff like that. So, I would say part of it is my upbringing. And the other aspect of it is just, some of the video games that I played.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's great it's always really great when your parents or your parents, I suppose, what's the word? Sorry, I'm getting hung up on this word. The people that raise you are so supportive of the thing that you do, because that might not always be the case.
It wasn't the case.
Oh, it wasn't?
It wasn't.
Oh.
Yeah.
So they put you into art, but...
They put me into a lot of programs, developmental things to develop my talents and my skills and, career options, sort of broaden my scope. But video games was never really something that they had in mind.
Right. It doesn't seem like... I would imagine that's standard for most kind of people in that position when they're kind of trying to set their kids up for a career of some sort, or at least some skills.
Yeah.
I'm curious what your parents think of what you do now, like compared to...
Yeah, now it's,
I would imagine that things kind of grow over time.
It's a lot less of a problem now.
Okay.
Because, well, first of all, I don't live with them anymore.
Yeah, of course,
so they don't really have the opportunity to really, be an obstacle.
Right.
Now it's sort of just the offhanded comment, like, have you ever thought about doing something else? Stuff like that. But
you know what you enjoy, what makes you happy and stuff like that. Okay,
yeah.
cool.
And that, that might change over time, but that's, it's up to me.
Okay.
And, I think part of their concern is just, they want the best for their child, right? And so they have their own idea of what that is. Mm-hmm. And they sort of imagine, they've always imagined me doing something like really big and grand, like something that would help, society as a whole.
It's a lot to live up to.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Only child, that kind of thing.
Right. I have 3 brothers, so I cannot relate.
Yeah. And it's also just, I'm also the only child to have left China. Like, it's sort of like the only child of an immigrant family that, has left, China and went overseas. So they had like huge expectations, not just from my parents, but also from my my Chinese family.
It's so. What is that like kind of pressure like? Is that like how do you cope with that? Is that maybe not as like, is that difficult to kind of navigate?
For sure. It definitely was very difficult. And for a long time, it was internalized, And when I say that, I mean, I didn't treat it as pressure. I didn't perceive it as pressure because that was just normal to me. Like, I thought that was how it was supposed to be. It's only when you grow up that you look back and you're like, that was, placing a lot of unrealistic expectations on a child, right? But back then it's like, yeah, of course I can do anything. Like, you expect me to do this, I want to do that too. Like, so it's but it did have a lot of side effects, on my mental health and stuff like that, and just the way in which I approach certain problems, or just think about what I want to do.
So, jumping back a bit, you mentioned you at 12 you kind of had a general idea of what you wanted to do, and I'm curious how you make the jump from taking this like kind of passion and translating it into a tangible thing, particularly in regards to like kind of secondary education. And is that something? Is that around the time where you moved from back home to kind of?
I think if I am understanding correctly, like how did it go from like a hobby to something that I actually so during the course of like throughout high school I did a lot of
in high school. It was like in China?
No, it was that was in Toronto. High school is in Toronto.
Okay.
So I left China when I was 8 years old.
Oh, okay, so well before.
Oh yeah. But yeah, no, I went to I was in Toronto at the time, and throughout high school and throughout middle school even I honed my skills in various aspects of game development, like 3D modeling, animation, programming, music, stuff like that. And and any opportunity I got, I would sort of convince teachers to sort of give me an alternate format on assignments.
Interesting.
To make them video games.
Oh.
And a lot of them actually let me do that. So for example, if one of the assignments was to write a paper on English history or biology or something like that, I would be like, can I make a video game about that instead? And the teacher's like, well, as long as you can put all the necessary information in it, go ahead.
That almost sounds like it would be more work.
Yes, but it's not.
But it isn't, because it's
something I want to do.
Exactly.
I didn't see it as work. That's just what I wanted to do, and I felt like I'd have a lot more fun doing that. I just dreaded writing papers, to be honest. Like, I just did not like writing those kinds of things.
I would imagine a lot of people that have an interest in games would fall somewhere under that kind of category.
Maybe.
Myself, I can say I would say it's similar.
Yeah.
I didn't have the foresight to kind of try and translate it into games of some sort, or even that I had those particular skills at that time. But I was very much like a hands-on person. I would like to think outside the box. I remember for a French project we had to make a board game, and I made it like a 3D board game where you go up the stairs and down the thing. I can't remember specifically, but it was like very much unique among all of the board games that were there. Like some of the more technically proficient students, had this super kind of polished board games, but mine I felt was like the only one that like was like outside of the box. So
nice.
That's the way that I kind of would tailor or try to tailor like my school experience to my benefits. Yeah.
Cool.
So you would try and take these assignments and tune them to your skill set.
Yeah.
So eventually when you graduate high school and you kind of go through that experience, I'm assuming you took some sort of post-secondary education?
Yeah. So I barely got into university, so I sort of...
In Toronto, still?
No, the university wasn't in Toronto, but I was in Toronto when I applied to university. I went to university in Kingston, Ontario. I went to Queen's. So I really left my applications first of all to the last minute, and my grades were very bad because I was just a really bad student. I think I got 60s in math, and it was just really not because I didn't I wasn't good at math. It's just I didn't like to do homework. I was just the worst possible student. So I got on the waiting list for Queen's, and it was the last school that I applied to, and I barely got in. So thank goodness. But
be interesting to know how life would be different.
Yeah.
If that moment in your life had turned out had a different outcome.
I have no idea, to be honest. But also at that point, I had shifted my attention from video game development to more focused toward AI. And so when I applied to university, I applied for cognitive science at Queen's, and cognitive science at Queen's was taught under computer science.
Mm-hmm.
It was part of the computing faculty. So it's like a mixture of computer science and psychology and linguistics, neuroscience, things like that. So it's not a pretty uncommon sort of combination.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
So what were you hoping to translate that program into?
It was like a weird dream that I had of like making like sentient AI robots, you know. And I was like, hey, I want to be part of that future, and so that I sort of applied with that in mind.
Okay, is that something that's still like you're interested in?
Yes, 100%. Not in, you know, it's sort of taken some turns. I have more specific attitudes about AI nowadays than I did back then. Back then it was kind of just like, you know, I want to make, you know, robot army. I don't know, like you know, weird things like that.
Okay.
But
hey, to each their own. No judgment. No judgment over here.
Yeah, but nowadays it's more like there are certain aspects of AI that I would like to explore.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit kind of ignorant when it comes to that whole world.
Mm-hmm.
My exposure to that is through, you know, clips I've seen of Elon Musk talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of curious to get your perspective on that relative to some of the concepts that Elon has discussed.
Okay. I actually haven't heard many of Elon's talks, but I have heard people describe his attitude as one of like extreme caution. Is that accurate?
Yes, I would say that's relatively accurate, yeah.
Yeah. And I would say that attitude is pretty much shared by most people when it comes to AI. They're a bit, you know, don't go too far, that kind of thing.
And it seems like you have a different approach?
Yes, sort of. I feel like these discussions around AI, when there is an attitude of extreme caution, it's about the type of AI that we sort of project into the future from the current state of things. And right now, AI is sort of seen as a tool, right? It's not really. Anytime you make AI, it's to help humanity. That's just always been the case.
It's a given.
Yes, it's a given. It's either like something to, even when it mimics a human, its purpose is to serve. You know, and nowadays we kind of use it for all sorts of things, more and more things, but it's always as a tool. And they're getting smarter and smarter, and they're getting better than humans at doing a lot of things. And if you just take that trajectory and you project it into the future, what you eventually get is something that's like way smarter than a human being, more just they're able to compute so much more in a lesser time, and they can sort of out-predict anything that you could predict. And so in a scenario, if they were to, you know, if their interests were to be at odds with humanity's, they would win. And that's sort of where the extreme caution comes from, is that we don't want to make something that can advance itself so quickly that, you know, they would leave us behind or see us as obsolete.
Like, is your perspective that's less not likely, or that it's very unlikely?
I feel like it is very likely.
That it's very likely that the caution is some people's concerns about the
caution is warranted, and I think that.
So it's interesting that you feel that way, but
so that here's the thing. I think we shouldn't approach AI development solely in that direction, because if you solely go in that direction, you're basically creating something that is unfeeling, right? It is a tool. It is all about efficiency, and it's all about optimization, doing something the best that it can with a specific purpose. And if you make something like that, by definition, it can't really empathize with human beings. And it would just treat us as part of an equation. You know, if you ever make an AI that could have an attitude on humanity, its attitude would be just
to serve.
It would serve, but if it is to serve, it would still sort of have its own take on how best to serve. And if it becomes smarter than you, its ideas about how to serve you might change, might not agree with yours. And then who are you to argue with it? If you've given it the goal to serve, does it also mean to obey? Not necessarily. I say, like, and who to obey, right? And just all of these questions. And I want to see a future in which we have AI that can empathize with human beings. That we could live alongside with these AI, and they would have their own interests and their own sort of biases and flaws.
So what steps are in place to kind of move it in a way that kind of mitigates any concerns or negative outcomes?
Well, right now, what people are trying to do is just think about these questions early and trying to place more restrictions and more, like, safeguards around the development of AI. Basically building a cage. And I think that is the wrong way to go. Well, it's not. I think it's not enough. I think that people need to see AI differently in order for this sort of relationship to grow in a healthier way. I think there needs to be more than one type of AI, just in terms of, we need AI that's not just made to be subservient. Yeah.
So, what? Trying to think of how to phrase this. What are the positive benefits? What are the positive benefits that you see in that you feel so strongly that it is something that we need to integrate into the way that we're living or the way that we're kind of interacting in the future? Or is it just kind of like a generic?
Well, okay, the reason, so you're sort of asking why I think it's even necessary to have AI that can empathize with human beings. Because I think the other type of AI is going to happen anyway. Whether or not, you build a cage or whatever, you can't stop people from making something dangerous. You just can't. Like, if someone really wants to advance AI technology and make something that's just super smart and without any restrictions, like, they're gonna do it. Like, you can't really stop them because knowledge is, you can't really contain that. And it's not like something that it's not something that can be regulated very well. We can barely regulate the internet right now. So I think if this dangerous path for AI it's going to happen. Someone's going to go down that path, and when that happens, I don't want the relationship between humans and AI to be strictly, what it is now, which is basically humans thinking of AI as a tool, and the tools are just, they have a mind of their own. About how they should perform their task, and we're basically part of that equation. I think that would be, I think the outcome of that is pretty obvious. If you have something that can make itself even smarter, basically, we're pretty much doomed if they cannot empathize with us and if they at all disagree with our purpose.
And there's nothing to stop someone to use it for their own selfish purposes, because you said you can't stop knowledge and you can't kind of stop how people use it. So hypothetically, someone could use it for...
I think the only way to stop that is if you have something that can rival the the intelligence of that sort of AI, but also be able to empathize with humanity.
That seems like a whole separate thing, like the teaching or programming something to empathize. Like, it's actually maybe a good tangent is, how does empathy and emotion integrate with AI? And I'm sure there's a whole kind of concept around that.
Yeah, well, not everybody's going to share this view, but I believe human beings are just a different kind of machine. We run on different components, but ultimately there is a sort of I don't want to say program, because that implies there's a purpose to humanity, but there's some sort of a set of rules that our brains follow and our biology follows, right? And if it's possible to construct this, it is possible to construct an emotional machine. Yeah,
I think it's a lot simpler than I kind of was probably anticipating.
I don't mean to make it sound simple. It definitely isn't. It's just that the idea that it is possible should not be...
Does not equate to simplicity.
Yeah.
Okay. Have you had a chance to kind of mess around with AI in your own? So essentially, I'm asking you: do you have your own kind of nefarious AI that you're developing?
No.
But no. On a serious note, have you had a chance to work on?
How much have I dabbled in it?
Yeah.
Not to the degree that I would like, just because in any sort of profession nowadays which involves AI is in that other sort of direction where it's as a tool, right? If you want to make money doing AI, if you want to have any sort of, even if you want to do research doing AI, you need money, right? And nobody's going to pay you to make AI that doesn't obey you. Like it's kind of, I'm still trying to find a way to frame it in such a way that people will see the value in it. I'm not really ready to sort of go full in on that yet. I'm still trying to think of what that would look like. Like, what would it even mean for me to work on that? Like, how would I be working on that? How would I be contributing to that? I have thought about how, like, just roughly that would, like, the development for that type of AI would go. I think right now we're trying to just look at what's efficient, what works, right? And we're sort of looking at humans as they are now. And even when we try to mimic human behavior, we sort of look at humans right now from the top down. And I think that's a mistake, because, like, if we want to build AI that has emotions and stuff like that, emotion is something that's evolved over like millions of years. It's not something that we just have. It evolved for reasons. And so if we haven't even made like a lizard, what makes us think we can make something like a human? Right? And so I think we need to start from way back, make the most simplest like life forms and build on top of that.
So if someone wanted to like break into this world a little bit and inform themselves on kind of, because I would imagine this is a kind of topic that you can just go on forever and ever about, like the different aspects. Like, you talk about this little piece over here in great detail. How did you kind of start? Where did you pick up like initial concepts that grew into kind of where you're at now with your approach?
I mean, as I've already said, it didn't always take that form, right? I initially just wanted to like, make a robot army, that kind of thing. So that sort of came from, just sci-fi, just...
or even this other iteration of the AI. How did you kind of... Did it just kind of happen organically from the kind of the initial concept?
So. Yeah, it sort of just happened. My views on AI sort of just slowly changed. And I mean, one day I just found myself thinking, hey, if we make... Like, I always wanted to make sentient AI. That was always a thing. But I've always wanted to make sentient AI as like, servants, right? Because that's just how you think of AI robots. Like they serve humans. How would you make something that's so intelligent that it's sentient, yet it can, serve you perfectly? That's sort of how we're designing robots nowadays, right? You want to make them move like a human being. You want to make them look like a human being. Have all the, be able to play instruments, run upstairs. You should see those videos from like Boston
Dynamics, the new video that they just put out of the Spot robot.
Yeah. But like, that they're designing these with the purpose of serving. They're not making these to run around like as citizens.
It seems like it's the epitome of serving.
Exactly. Yeah. And it scares people a little bit, right? Because it's moving like something that has a mind of its own. And I always just wanted to make that kind of thing. And eventually I thought, can you even make something that is sentient? Can it be, by definition, sentient, but also fully serve you? Does that make any sense? What does it mean to be sentient but not have any free will? And I just sort of eventually landed on my current philosophy, which is you can't. You cannot have something that is at the same time sentient, yet its purpose is just to serve you. And I thought, I would rather have something that is sentient and has flaws and can disagree with me maybe, but can empathize. It organically happened over time, I suppose.
So to jump back pretty far back.
That was,
I mean, we could... there's questions that I have that I don't know how to ask. So that's like a whole roadblock for me with regards to this conversation, because it's something that I'm definitely interested in, but nothing that I have probably put as much thought or energy towards as probably yourself, I would say. It's fair to say. But what I am curious about is not related, but so after your education, I'm curious how you translated all these different components, your experience in high school, at age 12, knowing what you wanted to pursue, how you then translated that into a kind of a career or a professional career.
Yeah. So while I was still in university, I took a game development course. Game development was still a passion of mine. I still wanted to...
This is a proper game development course, not like a kind of art course that is, you can kind of...
Oh yeah, no, it was called game design.
Okay.
And one of the project was to make a video game, and that's actually where I began the first video game that I published, Parallax.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's so cool.
Yeah. It was just
you've been working on that since then, eh?
On and off.
Of course. But that's so interesting.
Yeah. But that was where it started.
And, crazy.
It was. I think the assignment was to just make something that's innovative.
I would say that's innovative. It seems very innovative to me.
Thanks. Yeah. So I think at the time I was using an Ogre graphics engine. Halfway I switched to Unity, but I just made something that was, you go between two dimensions using these gates. it reminded people of Portal. So,
Right.
so a lot of people just call them portals.
Say Portal, Antechamber. That's the two games that I kind of...
Yeah, it gets compared to...
When they say, oh, it's like a Zelda mixed with a X, you know?
Yeah. So yeah, I started in that class, and then I think it got left to the side for quite a while. After I graduated, that same professor from that course hired me as a research assistant, a programmer at his game lab. So that university had a game lab where they make games for kids with disabilities.
Okay.
I think specifically it was cerebral palsy.
Okay.
So I think I worked there for a year or maybe two, just developing a video game for those kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was more, experience that I had developing video games. And that was a multiplayer game. It was online, so they got to, stay in their homes, and they had these bikes that they all had.
Oh, cool!
Yeah.
So this is...
It was an Xer game. That's what it's called. So they would all...
So it's tailored specifically for these kids.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So they have muscle atrophy because they don't get much exercise.
Okay.
So we put these bikes in their homes, and they sort of use the bikes to power the game.
Interesting.
I tied directly into the game mechanics, and it was online. They could chat. They had like Ventrilo, I think we were using. So yeah, that was an interesting experience. And then after that, I moved to Winnipeg because my girlfriend was doing her PhD here.
Okay.
So I moved over here, and I continued to work remotely for the game lab for just a little while. And then I worked on Parallax again.
Okay.
Yeah, and I finally finished it, and I published that on Steam. And then I gave a talk about it at WUG.
Okay, I think I might have... I'm not sure if I went to that one or not. But...
So Devin Reimer at the time was running WUG, and he saw that talk, and he approached me afterwards, and he sort of, offered.
Oh,
me
really?
a
Cool.
position.
This is so interesting. I'm learning. I feel like I'm learning so much about like I knew about these individual components. Like I knew that you were. I was aware of your game. I was aware that you were living in Winnipeg. I was aware of Devin. I was aware of the WUG. But it's interesting how all these components kind of come together.
Yeah.
So
but that was the story.
Jumping back to Parallax. What was that experience like? Because I think a lot of times when we're making games, they don't always come out as polished, and that's completely fine. But my perception of Parallax was, like you mentioned, it kind of has a Portal vibe to it, which kind of stands out from the typical games that kind of get released from people that are wanting to make games. What was the experience like with that game after release? Did it kind of what were your expectations? Did it kind of meet those, or?
I think if I were to have continued being an indie, and I think that was my plan before I got hired by Owlchemy Labs. I was working on another game at the time that it was like a continuation of a jam game. But if I had continued being an indie, I think Parallax would have sustained me for maybe a year, before I had to release another game. Yeah, I think it didn't...
Parallax 2.
Parallax 2, yeah. Maybe, yeah. But yeah, it's just... It didn't do as well as I wanted it to. It was my first game. I don't think I had huge expectations for it. It would have been great if it did better. People really liked it. I just don't think it got enough attention, and I don't think it had as wide appeal.
That's odd to me, because I was going to ask you what the reception was, particularly from maybe from media, things like that, because those I would imagine are the kind of components that would elevate it to the level maybe that you were looking for.
Yeah.
So it seems like it didn't get some of that traction?
No, and I think that part of it is just I had no idea how to do marketing.
Oh, right. That's a whole separate thing, right?
That's a whole separate thing. And I still don't know how to do marketing. So
or someone else can do that. Yeah. But it's interesting to me that, like, a game that's... you don't consider the comparison to Portal as a negative thing?
Slight, no.
Like, oh, my game is not... You know, I don't know. It would be...
Yeah. No, but, yeah, go ahead.
So I'm kind of curious. I'm a bit surprised because I was like, oh, this is a game that's, you know, has very similar themes to Portal, both like mechanically and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I would be surprised that it doesn't get the reception maybe that it...
Yeah. Well, no, I can be honest about that. I think it fell short in many ways.
Okay.
If you are to compare it to Portal, first of all, it didn't have the charm of Portal. It did not have a story. It had no characters, no voice acting. It was purely puzzle distilled. It was very logical, and so it only appealed to people who liked that. Mm-hmm. And it was less accessible for sure. It had a unique sort of visual style to it because it was purely two colors, like duochrome. Not even sure if that's a technical term for it, but it's black and white. Mm-hmm. So it made a lot of people visually sort of uncomfortable.
Okay.
So that is probably another component of it. And third, you know, I'm just like that was my first game ever. Mm-hmm. Like I never really learned how to design puzzles. Right? I had to sort of learn as I went, and I would say that the progression of puzzles in that game probably was not as tweaked or just ideal for as in Portal. I think Portal had a very nice sort of learning curve. And I think just once I sort of got the game out there, like just in terms of people knew about it, mm-hmm. and this was before release, because we did get some sort of attention by taking it to like conventions and stuff like that, so people knew about it. Once that expectation was out there, even when we had to, it was a good idea to change things about the game, we didn't want to because it would sacrifice, you know... Okay, so I say that because there were two other developers on the team.
Okay.
One is my partner from that course, Jesse Burston. His role was very limited after I left Kingston. So we did stuff in the class together, but after that it was, I would say I took the game to completion. Mm-hmm. And we have a musician from Australia, Nathan, and he did, you know, the music and some of the sound. So that's what I mean when I say we.
Okay.
Yeah, but just in terms of the actual, you know, the design of the levels and, you know, all the rewrites and the porting to Unity, that was mostly me. Hmm. So, yeah, there were things that we could have changed to make designing of the puzzles better, like things, but it was really difficult to introduce new elements to the game that made the puzzles more interesting because they would have to look good in black and white, and they would have to be not confusable with everything else in the game that was purely black and white. And it was just it was so limited because like you just couldn't put something that's black and white on top of something else that's black and white and make it stand out. Mm-hmm. There's only so many things you could do that would look distinct, and so that was a huge limitation to us. But it's like that's our identity now because it's out there. People knew us as the black and white Portal, like
black and white Portal.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people called me that game. So so a lot of it was, you know, due to that. And looking back, I think I would have made different decisions now if I were to do it again. But you know, I was inexperienced, and so which just sort of stuck to the existing mechanics and how to make the best of what I had. and try and get as many puzzles out of that as possible. So it did pretty good considering it was my first game.
I would say I would say so.
Yeah.
So it's nice to see that eventually it kind of translated into a pretty interesting, exciting opportunity.
Yeah.
Although I'm curious how you ended up at WUG. Like, who had did someone reached out to you and they were aware of your game and they knew you lived in Winnipeg? Did you have a relationship with Graham at the... Or Devin was running the meetup group, correct?
Question. That's a little blurry. I'm trying to remember what happened.
I always connect WUG with Graham, but at that time it was Devin that was running.
Oh, yeah, it was Devin that was running it for sure. So I'm pretty sure he approached me.
To speak at the event?
Yes.
Okay.
I think I did attend WUG before that, and that may have been how I met him.
Okay.
And then maybe he heard about, the projects that I was working on through somebody else that was at WUG. Somehow he came to that knowledge, and he approached me to give a talk about the game. Yeah. Okay.
So anyways, you give this presentation. Devin offers you an opportunity. What is that kind of experience, the transition like? Because was that your first kind of major opportunity in the games industry?
Yeah, it was,
because Parallax was your first game, but this would have been your first
actual being part of a game studio.
Okay.
Yes, it would have been the first. For sure.
And that's Owlchemy Labs.
Yes.
Okay.
Owlchemy Labs offered me a job, and So sorry, what exactly is the question? Is
what's that experience like? So getting an opportunity to professionally pursue the thing that you have been doing, kind of on the side or in projects and in school, and it translates to this is now your career.
So it's interesting because at the time I was planning to do indie development. I wanted to make my own games. That was the plan. And at the time I was currently working on I believe it was Rhythm Ranger.
Yeah, with Bogdan, Igor, Megan.
Yes. Yeah, we did a Ludum Dare jam and we won gold.
34, I think it is.
Yeah, I think maybe a good memory. Maybe it was 34. Yeah.
I have this weird, insane memory for this exact kind of stuff.
Wow.
I don't know impressive. Why. Even just the fact that I remember everyone who worked on that project.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
So this was. Where did Rhythm Rangers fall into the kind of timeline with Parallax, Owlchemy Labs, and then...
So it was after I released Parallax. I did another Ludum Dare jump. So Rhythm Ranger was the second Ludum Dare that I did with the other three. And I did another one before that, I think it was 32nd, with Escape Character. It was like a little simulation of a computer, and you're like a little file on it that became sentient.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah. That's the one that you said that you won Ludum Dare with?
That one won silver, and then Rhythm Ranger with the team got gold.
Okay. And
that's the one we decided to sort of expand into a full game.
I think that's where I first not met you, but became aware of you, was that when you're in the computer one.
Oh, okay.
I think that's the first kind of vague memory of you. But anyways, go on.
Yeah. So we wanted to develop Rhythm Ranger into a full game. Okay. And development was very slow with the team, and
just due to the nature of everyone having working their careers at the same time while trying to do this project?
I'm not sure exactly, but I think it was partially that, but it was also that we had different ideas of what the timeline should look like, or what the workflow should be of how to see the project to completion. I think some of us wanted to take our time and sort of, it's done when it's done. We're indies for a reason. Like we can, there's nobody to rush us. I think I was more on the side of we should still set more concrete goals and try and ship this game, because that is how we stay afloat. And I think the job offer came at a point where I was sort of it was just enough to sort of sway me to take this steady paying job. And it did take multiple tries though, because it was
what took multiple tries
for Devin to convince me to join Owlchemy Labs. Because at the time VR was still very new, right? And I wasn't as passionate about it as many people were. Right. So he invited me out to his home in Morden. And had me put on the headset and try out like the job simulator kitchen demo,
which was probably then hardware that was not public at the time.
It was like prototype stuff. But I tried that, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. I took some convincing, and
So what were your concerns? Is it just that the technology was...
It's not so... I had to weigh, all the different sorts of factors. Because at the time, I really wanted to do my own thing. I wanted to be an indie. That was my plan, right? So, joining a studio was not my plan. But at the same time, it's I didn't want to stall forever. I wanted to make something, and I wanted to support myself. Right? So it was just a lot of different factors. It's not to say that the demo of Job Simulator was bad. It wasn't at all.
Just different. It's different.
Just
what
goals, right?
Different goals.
Yeah, exactly. So at the time, it was a very difficult decision, but I did decide to join Owlchemy on Job Simulator. So.
And so you've been with them since then. How has your view on VR changed from when you had maybe, for lack of a better word, concerns about VR, or maybe I'm incorrectly representing it. It was more that you wanted to focus on an indie than it was about concerns over VR.
Yeah. It wasn't that I had my doubts about VR.
Okay.
I wasn't really invested in VR to have so much of an opinion.
It was just you were indifferent towards it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So I guess a better way to phrase that would be, how has your view on VR changed then versus now, being kind of at the pinnacle of VR in a way, I suppose?
Yeah, I would say Owlchemy is definitely one of the pioneers of many aspects of VR. It changed, honestly. I think throughout the development of Job Simulator, my view of VR didn't change at all. I think I was committed to the project. I wanted to see it, to completion. I was, on board with the team, and I had that drive, right? But it wasn't because I want VR to succeed. It was only after launch of Job Simulator, and I saw how well received it was.
Like the Mario Kart or the Mario 64 of VR.
It's not that I didn't enjoy VR. It's just I was okay, this is a new thing. I had no idea just how significant it would be, because and just how different and how new it was to people, and how it made gaming a lot more accessible to certain people that just couldn't be able to get into any other type of game, because VR just comes naturally to a lot of people. When you can just grab things and throw them around, you don't have to be really told what button combination to press and stuff like that. So just seeing the difference that VR could make in many people's lives, and just seeing a lot of positive feedback on Job Simulator from players, that really changed my mind, I think.
It's it's interesting to see what the former Owlchemy CEO with his new company, their like approach, because I guess they had recently announced their new company and kind of what their goals are. So I got a similar vibes to what you're referring to, and kind of the new things that they're doing. So I mean, between that and the kind of pioneering that you're doing with Owlchemy, it seems like a very exciting thing to be a part of.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But other than that, other than kind of the journey to where you got to, I'm kind of curious what you see like in the future. So kind of taking into consideration everything that kind of led up to this point, what do you think are like the biggest things that you learned along the way?
Oh boy, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Biggest things I learned along the way,
or like the most important lessons or specific moments that kind of led you down this path.
That's a really tough one.
Or even like people maybe that kind of influenced you, or like mentors or role models, or kind of anything that kind of facilitated that like journey, whether it's an interaction or a moment or a decision or a person.
I think,
or is it all just mostly like an organic process?
It was an organic thing, and I think it's just a lot of tiny things that built up toward like a general attitude toward working on a team. Right? I wouldn't say it comes down to one or two lessons or even 10. It's really just, I've never really worked on a team for like a prolonged period of time on like a project of that scale before, and it was just it was a humbling experience, I would say, because before that point I sort of saw myself as the director of a lot of things. I would make the biggest decisions on my own, I would say working at Owlchemy has put me in a different spot where I had to let go of that sort of ego, and it was just
so a lot of the like kind of transitional stuff is kind of more in the present than it was like in the past, in terms of like transitioning from the directorial kind of traits to kind of working in a new environment. And you also work remotely.
Yes.
I don't know if that's something that you're just kind of used to, or something that you had to learn.
Oh, working remotely was all I ever knew, really. I mean, except when I worked at the game lab. I would go to the game lab and work there. But when you look back at your life, this is kind of to summarize like your journey and maybe even this conversation in a way. Okay. When you look back at your life, what would you like to have been said about it? Holy crap. I mean, no, that's not what I would like to do. I mean, just like, holy crap, that's a big, profound question.
Yeah. I find there's generally some interesting answers that like come from that, because it is, sometimes it does take a little bit to like process.
Probably, like, let's put it into just one phrase, I suppose. Like, yeah, that guy had some cool ideas.
Sometimes it's like the simplicity of that is like, it doesn't always need to be this long kind of convoluted philosophical kind of comment.
I'm actually very surprised that I was able to answer that. So I've never thought about that question.
Yeah.
Like, thank you for asking me, because
it's interesting. Like I generally like to ask people that question, because like I like to have a unique conversation with everyone, like whether I meet someone on the street or otherwise. But the interesting thing about asking this consistent question is like the perspective, like your perspective is unique, which is why like I want to talk to you is like so I can understand and like learn more about like what makes you beyond Parallax, beyond Owlchemy Labs,
right?
Because there's these other things are more important or just as important as the things that are visible. But my point is to say that I find it interesting how people can answer the question in different ways. I feel like there's a bunch of other things I want to talk to you about. They're on the fringe of my brain. But the nice thing about these kind of things is like we can always do it again. And I would love to at some point. There's like I wanted to get into your dog, which is maybe like a weird, I don't know, like what kind of breed is it real quick?
It's a Shiba Inu.
A Shiba Inu. Yeah. I just see a lot of that on Twitter. So I just, because I have a cat, so I'm curious like what you get out of that experience. Actually, real quick, if we want to get into that.
Sure.
So you have you really have a relationship with your like dog.
Oh yeah.
And beyond just it being a dog.
Yeah. I love him like so much. He's like very important to me and my girlfriend's lives.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just he's great. He has his own personality. He's kind of judgy and antisocial, but we know he loves us, and we love him too. So he's just always there for us, and he makes a bad day a good day, an okay day. Okay. So he really helps.
So like I very much appreciate that because I feel like I get similar. I have a similar experience with my cat, and I think those kind of relationships are healthy, whether it's a dog or a cat, or even if you do boxing, for example, like anything that's outside of like game development, right? Because we all are involved in game development to some aspect, right. But I think it's healthy to be responsible. Whether it's responsibility with what's your dog's name?
Artie.
Yeah. Whether it's being responsible for Artie and Artie being responsible for you, maybe as well in some sort of way. Yeah. I feel like that's just good for like mental health and for your soul, not to be like cheesy.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. Yeah. I think an important thing for all game developers is to have something in your life that's not game development. I know it sounds weird, but it really, I found that the best content I've ever produced came from periods of my life when there were other things to fill my life. That, I wasn't just 24/7 thinking about work. I can say that with confidence.
With that, I wanted to thank you for your time again.
Thank you for having me.
There's many other things that I wanted to get into. But yeah, again, we can always have another chat. So thanks for your time. Other than that, if someone wanted to like follow some of your stuff, I know you have a pretty Twitter. Decent Twitter account.
Yeah, that's basically my only social media presence.
And what is your Twitter handle?
Major McDoom.
Okay, and so it's mostly just Twitter is kind of how you interact online?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, cool. And with that, that's another episode. Again, you can go to our website, interactiveindie.com, and there's links to all the podcast platforms, a link to the YouTube. I've spoken with many people from the community, so if you're interested to hear other conversations with a wide diversity of people from the community, give it a try, and Other than that, I was missing Daniel Bergman. Has been huge for this podcast through his post-production work and editing, which is super time-consuming. So I just want to say I appreciate him. Dan Blair from BitSpace Development. We're recording at the BitSpace office right now, and a lot of the equipment I'm using is BitSpace equipment. And other than that, just like yourself and the people that are listening or contributing, whether you listen or just kind of pass it along, I appreciate it. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Sweet.